So, you've got your tree survey done, right? Your planning consent has dropped into your inbox and everything's good to go, right? Wrong. You need to check your decision notice carefully to make sure that you haven't got a condition for an arboricultural method statement. In this episode of Ask the Arb, I'm going to break down exactly what an AMS is, why you need it, and what will happen if you forget.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to the Ask the Arb podcast. So, this one we're talking all things trees and arboricultural method statements. So, you've got your tree survey done. You might have had it done months before you get your decision notice. Job done, right? Wrong. So, essentially, there is a second stage that we need to talk about when it comes to arboricultural method statements. And with arboricultural method statements, you're one site meeting away from breaching planning conditions. So you really must make sure that you do this correctly. And in this episode of Ask the Arb, I'm going to break down the AMS, what is it, what it isn't, why ignoring it could cost you more than a few trees. So let's dive right into this one. So first off, why should you care? Well, the arboricultural method statement isn't just paperwork. It's essentially your license to build next to trees. How does this come about? Well, how it comes about is it may well have been produced with your original tree survey. So it'll be all bundled together with your arboricultural impact assessment and your arboricultural method statement. The two things may well be in one report. Or it could be that it's a separate document that you have not yet had produced. When you have a look through your decision notice, you may well see a planning condition in there about protecting trees through the development phase, and it's normally a condition of approval that you have an arboricultural method statement produced or the works on site are carried out in accordance with an arboricultural method statement. Breach of planning conditions basically means an enforcement risk. So there's a chance that they're going to come out and stop the work. If the trees are protected and you damage them, you could be looking at fairly sizable fines. So it's important to make sure you do this correctly. An awful lot of people come to us needing an arboricultural method statement. Sometimes they come to us because works have been stopped on site because they need an AMS. What we sometimes find is that when it's enforcement, that we'll go out to site and we'll find that the tree protection measures that were specified within the original report haven't been put in place on site, and there's actually been significant tree damage done. So it's important to get the timeline right with this and to make sure you do it correctly. So first off, what is a arboricultural method statement? Well, an arboricultural method statement is a technical document that sets out exactly how the retained trees on site are going to be protected through the development phase without damaging them, essentially. Now, the AMS is broken down into numerous different packages or paragraphs and parts of the document. First off, we talk about tree protection fencing. What is tree protection fencing? Tree protection fencing is usually herass panels, which are bolted together on site. They're constructed on the edge of the root protection zone, and the area behind the fencing, between the fencing and the tree, forms basically a no-go zone that nobody, apart from the project arboricultural consultant, is allowed in through the development phase, and that's to ensure the tree doesn't get damaged. If it's not possible to put that fencing in, the AMS will detail ground protection. So this is quite often boarding that's put down on a compressible layer of wood chip so that pedestrians and vehicles and equipment can move over it without damaging the tree roots. It will also talk about access routes, approved access routes in and out of the site to make sure trees aren't damaged. It will talk about things like site compounds and storage areas to make sure there's no contamination of the trees. It may be that as part of the landscaping, there's going to be some car parking involved, or car park creation or hard landscaping. So it will talk about no dig surfaces. So this is basically how you can create a car parking space within the root protection area of a tree. So it will talk about that, and most importantly, it will also talk about arboricultural supervision, or what we call ACAL, Arboricultural Clerk of Works, and this is where somebody will be specified and they will come to the site at key points throughout the development phase to make sure all of these things are working together how they should. So it is, the AMS is the how to the tree protection plan's what. The TPP will show you what you need to do, and the AMS will tell you how. It should be written in plain English so that everybody on site can understand it. So quite often, as I say, this will be put on as a planning condition. So it's critically important to read your decision notice clearly. And if you have a condition on there that says something like, no development shall commence until a method statement for tree protection has been approved in writing by the council, blah, 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 then this is essentially what it is referring to. Even the scale of development doesn't matter, it's irrelevant. Even minor driveways, things like driveways, extensions, even minor developments like driveways and extensions and things like that may well need a arboricultural method statement. If you're developing near trees, it's likely something that is going to come up. So, what can go wrong without it? Well, we'll talk about that, but first, this. You've got the questions, the planning system's a nightmare. We have got the answers. Welcome to the Planning Permission Panic Line. Yep, it's that time. It's that time again. So on Panic Line this week, we have got, let me find my list. We've got two that are relevant to this particular podcast. So first off, we're going to talk to Kelly in Derbyshire. So Kelly in Derbyshire asked our office, she said, her architect said to her, we might need a tree constraints plan. What does that actually show and who draws it up? Great question, Kelly. So essentially, a tree constraints plan is exactly that. It is a 2D graphical representation of the trees, how they sit on your site, where they're physically located. We'll try and put an image of one into the video if you're watching on video, and it's a graphical representation, 2D representation of the trees in relation to the existing site. So if you've got trees around the edge of your garden, a tree in the middle of your lawn, it's going to show those trees. It's going to show not only the above ground constraints, so the shape of the crown spread to all cardinal points of the compass, north, south, east, west. It's also going to show the below ground constraints, which are based on a measurement we take off the stem, and this is called the root protection area, and this will show as an offset from the stem of the tree. We can produce, in my company, a fairly accurate tree constraints plan with basic off-the-shelf drawings, but it's always best and more accurate if you commission a topographical survey, because that allows us to snap the tree positions to the topographical plan, and you end up with a really accurate document. Why do you need a really accurate tree constraints plan? Because when you overlay your development proposals over the top, it will show you the relationship between the new building and the trees and let you know if there's any problems or not. So think of a tree constraints plan as showing you where the problems are on site, where the tree constraints are. So that's that one. Thanks, Kelly. We've also got one here from Martha in York, who says, how long does it take to get a tree survey back once you've done the site visit? That was sent in to our senior consultant, Alex. So that one is specific to my business. But generally speaking, I mean, most arboricultural consultancies will get your report back within 2 weeks max. It depends on the complexity of it, essentially, and the quality of your drawings. The more information that you give upfront to the consultant, the easier it is for them to do their piece of work. What I would say is that when the consultant goes to site, the site element only forms about probably 10 to 15% of the actual whole job. So that's that one, and that is the panic line. So let's go back to the podcast and what can go wrong. So let's have a look. What can go wrong? Well, the first thing that can go wrong is root severance, and that's the main one. So if you've got trees on site and you haven't got the right tree protection in place and the builders come roaring on in there, there's a very good chance that they're going to end up carrying out some form of root damage. Root severance, where they dig through the roots of trees, is the most obvious one. Most people tend to think that tree roots go straight down. They tend to go out horizontally up to a metre or so in depth from the surface root. Popular sort of opinion is that all tree roots sit within the top 500 mil of soil, but the reality is, depending on the area, like London for instance, they can go much deeper. So tree roots tend to go out from the stem. So that's root severance. Compaction, so equipment driving through, creating tram lines, can damage the tree roots. Waterlogging, so maybe the builders are pumping something out, and tree roots are not only advantageous, but they also, that's how the tree breathes. So if those roots are underwater, the tree will suffocate essentially. And then lastly, chemical contamination. The big one there is cement mixing and washings being spilled onto the ground. That can contaminate the tree. Now, nothing happens quickly with trees. You might think everything looks absolutely fine, and then 5 years later, the tree starts to look not very healthy at all. And you see this on new build developments right across the country. So all of these, root severance, compaction, waterlogging, chemical contamination, can lead to tree death, which could result in enforcement, complaints from the neighbours, planning condition breaches, and obviously the liability I spoke about earlier if the tree is TPO'd or in a conservation area. And at the end of the day, just think, the tree officer doesn't care how pretty your house is if you've killed a protected oak in the process. And to give you a really good example of really quite poor aftercare, we've all been to a supermarket, parked in the car park, or a big retail outlet, and up and down the car park you've got all these tiny little trees that are either snapped in half or dying because they've been planted in a really poor environment. So avoid that one. Who writes the arboricultural method statement? Good question. So the arboricultural method statement has to be written by a qualified arboricultural consultant. Can't be written by an architect, planning consultant, no matter how experienced they are. They have to have the right background and the right qualifications, because this becomes a legally binding document that can be challenged. The arboricultural method statement must follow the British standard for trees. That is about to change, literally, I think 2025, 2026, that is changing. But at the moment, the standard is BS 5837 2012. And what does a good AMS look like? Well, it's practical, first off, because the construction site manager and the work crew are going to use it. It's tailored to the site, not generic, and it's enforceable. We see lots of bad arboricultural method statements, which are just copy and pasted fluff that quite often gets binned on site, or worse still, could be overly restrictive. So the AMS, it's not for the desk, it's not for the local authority, it's for the boots on the ground, it's for the site teams, so that they can make sure that ultimately the retained trees are protected and not damaged. So it's our next feature. Are you ready for this one? I know you love these. Hi folks, it's time for You Couldn't Plan It, the feature where me and my team have scoured the internet for stupid, silly and downright infuriating planning related facts. Let's go. So, I think last week we were talking about decking, weren't we? So let's have a look here. What have we got on my list? Let's have a look. Well, this is a good one. How about an alien bungalow? Now, I'm sure you can probably all guess here, this is coming from the Sun again, this time the Scottish Sun. So what have we got here? I'm sure we can probably pop a photo up somewhere about this alien bungalow. Well, I'm looking at the first photo here, and it doesn't look particularly alien, and we can see the homeowner here, Mark Jones, is sat there with his couple of Springer Spaniels, and it looks like a lovely property to me. Anyway, this dad is basically claiming that he faces homelessness after he was ordered to tear down a bungalow in his ex-wife's back garden in a planning row. It never ends well, does it? Mark Jones, 55, spent 180 grand building the home in Sutton Coldfield, but now has until the end of June to demolish the mini property. So I wonder if that's happened yet. Let's have a look at this terrible abomination. It looks absolutely fine to me. He accused Birmingham City Council of bullying him and said he would move to Spain if it had to be bulldozed. He began the build without planning permission. There we go, folks. In March 2019, hoping his late father could move in, but his father died that October. Interestingly, I mean, we are using these as sort of funny examples of what can go wrong, but there's actually a serious point to all of this. I regularly have people on the phone to me in tears who have had bad advice either from an architect or most likely a friend or family that they don't need planning permission for something, or it'll be easy, or Bob down the road did it, and they build something for sometimes a very, very genuine need. It might be to support somebody that's got additional care needs, or to move in an elderly relative. This happened a lot in COVID, and they crack on with it with the best of intentions, and then find that they've fallen foul of planning law, and unfortunately they have to rip the building down, which leads to heartache, family dramas, and obviously financial pain as well. Mark here, he believed he could build the bungalow under permitted development rules, which just isn't correct. He had less than a fortnight to meet the demolition deadline, having twice been refused planning permission, and he lost at appeal. And it looks to me like it's an infill development. The Sun has obviously gone with alien building, but it looks like a perfectly acceptable building to me. And he built it in his ex-wife's garden by the looks of it. So top tip, do a proper feasibility study, and get all your ducks in a row before you crack on with that. So that is, you couldn't plan it. So back to the episode, let's have a look. What should you ask for as a developer or architect if you need a arboricultural method statement? So what you should essentially be asking your arboricultural consultant for is a phased tree protection plan. So you want to know exactly what you're doing at the exact right time. So it needs to be really, really clear. You want a site-specific method statement. For example, if you're installing piles, you need to know exactly how you can install those near trees, things like ground protection boarding and all that sort of stuff. You want to know about toolbox talks. At what stage does your arboricultural clerk of works need to come into the site and check what's going on? Normally there's a pre-start meeting, there's a check after the protection fencing goes up, there might be a check midway through depending on what's going on, and then there'll be a final check right at the very end of the project. And you want to make sure that the arboricultural method statement is in the hands of the contractor before any work starts on site, and you want it to be referenced in their construction management plan. If your AMS arrives after the digger does, then it's already too late. So let's end with a quick recap on this one. An AMS is essentially a legal safeguard. It's a practical guide. It's an insurance policy against bad press and bad decisions. Don't treat it as a box-ticking exercise. Use it as your construction team's manual for tree-friendly construction. Get your arboricultural clerk of works booked early. Most consultancies will have a fairly substantial lead time into that type of work. And ultimately, make sure you check your decision notice for AMS conditions early on. So I hope that has been helpful to you. If you're a developer, architect, or consultant wondering how all of this will affect your project, drop us a line. We're always happy to help out. Subscribe and stay ahead, and we'll speak to you at the next one.